All right, thanks everyone for joining. We're just going to give folks a minute or two to join the webinar, and then we'll get started.
Ben, does your office actually have that amazing view of the Manhattan skyline behind you? Oh,
No,
okay.
this had to be from like a helicopter or something.
Beautiful.
People ask that all the time though.
It's a nice fantasy, like a nice New York fantasy. Like have
Yeah,
a view of the whole city.
yeah.
All right, I think we've got folks still trickling in, but why don't we get started? Because I know we got a lot to cover today. So, hey everyone, thanks much for joining. I am Bobby. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Elion, and thrilled to be hosting our conversation today on AI governance. For those of you who are familiar, Elion is a healthcare technology research and intelligence company. Our mission is pretty simple. We're trying to make it easier for health systems and provider organizations to discover, evaluate, and adopt cutting edge technology to address their key priorities. And so today, that means we help a lot of institutions with how to evaluate and adopt AI. So hence the critical importance of AI governance and why we're diving into it today. Before we get started, I just want to share a quick note about something that we've been working on for a while and are actually going to be releasing to coincide with this webinar. Um, Over the last several months, we've actually spoken with more than 20 AI governance leaders for prominent health systems across the country to understand what AI oversight looks like in practice today. And so this work's become the basis for an in-depth report that really captures and synthesizes our learnings about where these systems are today in their journey and how they're approaching key elements like their committee structure and makeup, how they're resourcing AI governance, the policies and frameworks they're using, how they manage the governance lifecycle, including things like intake, screening, risk assessment, and monitoring, and how they're approaching change management and adoption. We think this is probably the deepest look out there on the state of AI governance that's available today. So we're excited for folks to check it out. And additionally, because we didn't just want to capture the state of the world without providing some guidance for folks on what they should be doing, we actually partnered with Dr. Sarah Gebauer, one of the panelists on our webinar today, to put together a toolkit that brings together templates, policies, rubrics, reference documents that AI governance practitioners can pull off the shelf and adapt to their own needs. So I'll let Sarah say just a couple words about it.
Yeah, like Bobby mentioned, AI governance committees are rapidly growing, and with that becomes a lot of issues in terms of how do we actually do this? How do we form these? What are the documents and processes that we need? And we really wanted to provide hands-on practical guidance for that. So we have a lot of documents that can really help people on a practical level implement these kinds of insights and knowledge from some of the hospitals and health systems that have done a great job, like those at Mount Sinai and at Geisinger from our other panelists here.
Cool. So it looks something like this. As I mentioned, a whole bunch of great material in there. So we'll drop a link in the chat if there's interest in taking a look. And yeah, excited to get your thoughts and feedback. So with the housekeeping out of the way, let's dive into the discussion. Just one note up front. We're going to be saving a good amount of time for Q&A at the end. So feel free to drop questions in the chat. If it's super pertinent, maybe we'll answer it in the midst, but for the most part, I'll be saving questions to the end. And so with that, I'll turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. And Morgan, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Morgan Jeffries. I'm a neurohospitalist, and I'm the medical director for AI Geisinger. I've been with the system since 2018, full-time. I actually did locum tenens at Geisinger before that. I started out I was doing full-time neurohospitalist and part-time informatics, and then kind of gradually increased the amount of work that I was able to do in that space. So I've been doing a majority time in informatics for the past 4+ years. A lot of that is work. A lot of that work has been like on orders and order sets. then supporting individual departments, but then moving into AI in 2023. So in my role as medical director for AI, I've worked closely with our AVP for AI, Mike Tregellis, and our senior director of AI product management, Kevin Coyle. We've done work to develop our AI policy that we did. That was about a year plus ago. Managed to work with a lot of other higher level people in the organization to kind of put something together that was specific enough, but also loose enough that it was flexible as we sort of figure out what we're doing in this space. And so like we've done a lot of work. That's been a lot of what we've done as well. And then I also do some work, around specific implementation of specific AI solutions, like especially clinical ones, and in education as well.
Great. Ben, I'll skip to you.
All right, and thanks for having me. So, hi everyone, I'm Ben Kaplan. I work for the Mount Sinai Health System. It's an academic medical center located in New York City. You can see it right behind me. I work in the digital and tech department. I have a background in consulting, product management, and have been in and out of IT departments probably for the last 15 years or so. At Mount Sinai, I'm a senior director of AI products and governance. What this really includes oversight over an in-house clinical data science and engineering group. I manage clinical AI products and some of our automation tools and teams, and really more broadly, AI lifecycle management, which is inclusive of AI governance. I'd say my direct involvement with AI governance, 2 years ago, the Mount Sinai executive team really charged the technology group and other groups with, designing and operating a vision to establish a program to ensure AI was implemented safely and responsibly across the health system. So I came in, and helped kind of design that framework and plan and program. And, that was 2 years ago. A lot's happened. Now I would say it's really evolved into what we consider, a center of excellence. And really this center of excellence has a major role in designing and delivering standards to govern AI throughout its life cycle at Mount Sinai. So, really excited for this conversation. It's very, very pertinent to what's going on right now.
Great. Thanks, Ben. And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Jabauer. I'm an anesthesiologist and palliative care physician. I have been doing consulting for a long time for health tech products, and more recently focusing more on consulting specifically for AI governance. I've spent the last 2 years at RAND doing AI model evaluations for national security risks, especially biosecurity. As you might imagine, it's a similarly high stakes environment with a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of those lessons can be transferred directly into the healthcare space. So really excited to be here with the other panelists and happy to get started.
Great. So let's start with just a little bit of level setting. I want to go through a little bit about, Morgan and Ben, where you both are today in terms of AI governance. And so, Ben, I'll actually start with you, if you don't mind providing just a brief overview of really what your AI governance program looks like.
Yeah. Happy to. So, when we started our AI governance journey, we recognized that AI, is a different technology. Its capabilities and risk go well beyond, traditional technology that our department has, been managing for years. So, with that said, we really began with a very robust standalone AI governance program. This included, an executive steering group to really help for strategic guidance, investment decisions. We instituted an AI review board to evaluate and prioritize incoming new tools, and really, brought risk ethics and policy. That committee was kind of key early on to really help define the guardrails. And I'd say in the program, our key early wins were we developed a general AI use policy that really, stretched across the entire health system. We built a central catalog. So this was an environmental scan internally, where is AI being implemented across the health system. And two other things was instituting a risk assessment process. That was key. We can't evaluate everything, so we really needed to risk stratify what was coming through. And then finally, we launched an AI hub. You can even Google it, Mount Sinai AI, and you'll see our hub. This was in collaboration with our AI human health department and marketing as well. And that really brought centrally a lot of the information going on around AI at Mount Sinai to one place. So that was 2 years ago. A lot's changed. I think we quickly realized that managing AI as a completely separate pathway was burdensome. A lot of the folks that were in our digital committees were also now in our AI. So, more meetings, more process, it kind of led to slower progress. So about a year ago, we made a shift to embed AI governance with our existing digital governance framework, which was very effective before AI. And that's where now AI at Mount Sinai lives today. So our Digital AI Governance Committee really provides that oversight, but we do maintain separate pathways for functions such as assurance and validation testing, policy and standards development, and post-go-live monitoring. So that's kind of been that's the overview of our program. So, a lot, maturity-wise, we're becoming, more mature as we go along in some of these key areas.
Cool. Super helpful. And we'll dig into the specifics of some of that a little later on in the conversation. But Morgan, do you mind just giving a quick overview of how you guys have designed your program as well?
Yeah, sure. So we also started out, like one of the early things that we did was to develop a basic AI policy for the organization that was, again, flexible enough that that we weren't sort of like painting ourselves into a corner, uh, but but specific enough that we felt like we were covering a lot of the risks sort of at a high level. Um, and then we got to work with the actual task of governance. So the initial thing was we have we have like a core group of people that are working on AI. We have our chief data and informatics officer, and then underneath him is our AVP for AI. And then our senior director for AI product management and I kind of work together on this centralized team. But there are a lot of other people in the organization, not surprising, this is going to be true everywhere, who are very interested in AI and have and have a stake in it. And so we put together an AI executive steering committee that could sort of provide that kind of high level oversight and governance. For anybody who's been in a large organization, I think this will not be surprising to hear. That body is not really doing a lot of decision making. It's really about, look, it's a huge organization. There's no one person in the organization that knows everything that's going on. So if you have ideas for things, you kind of need to have the right people in the room to hear about them so that they can raise concerns. And then, decision making usually happens at some later point, but it's kind of a way to keep people on the same page. And then within it, we have underneath that what we call our AI. Well, we call it like the AI subcommittee, but it's basically our governance committee. And right now, that is one committee, and that consists of me, our AVP for AI, again, senior director for AI product management, our chief privacy officer, two bioethicists, someone from our audit team, and a couple of clinicians. And so the initial idea was, okay, well, we'll have our intake process, and every program that comes through will come in front of this committee. There are aspects of that we've gotten to work pretty well. So the intake process, I think we're catching things. We are actually seeing the programs that are coming through that have AI. Anything that's like a request for us is obviously going to get flagged. But what's really the really important thing is catching things that are vendor solutions, making sure that those are identified as, there's some AI component here that needs to be governed. And both our IT PMO office and our contracts office are aware of that. So there are these two checkpoints where, as people go through the intake for those, they get asked whether there's an AI component. And also the people in those offices are aware of this issue. And even if the person says no, they will look to see. It's like, kind of sounds like there's AI in this thing. And then that will get flagged for us. And then that goes through, basically we reach out to them and ask them to fill out a questionnaire that sort of describes what the solution is and, various risks associated with it. And then that comes in front of our governance committee. Now, we were doing everything in a centralized fashion, but, there's a huge number of, and like the volume has gotten quite high. And we're realizing it's going to get higher. One issue that one area where we've recognized this is going to play out is we have a lot of vendors who are building agentic platforms on top of the software that they already offer. So like ServiceNow and like Workday, and I mean, there's several others. But as they say, when they're saying like, yeah, you can spin up, like an agentic solution for whatever on this platform, it's okay. All of those actually would qualify as AI systems according to our definition, and they all should have to come in front of our governance committee. But our governance committee already has a big backlog of programs that we need to review. And so we've recognized this, and we've started to pivot towards having a more distributed form of governance, where those platform owners now are going to be responsible for ensuring that whatever solutions are crafted on top of this platform adhere to our policy. And we're figuring, like, we've just started doing this, but we're figuring out like, okay, what does that look like? How much communication do they need to have with us? We've also started to think about like whether they need special education. Well, I mean, really not whether they do, but figuring out like exactly what that's going to look like. And so I think, we've started to recognize that. And then additionally, we've kind of started to recognize education as being more broadly important for AI governance and safety. So we're crafting some courses for just our general users, but also specifically for these platform owners and then individual program owners as kind of for AI stewardship.
Great. So you started to get in a little bit to what my follow-up question was going to be, which is, what are some of the biggest changes you've made along the way as you've been starting to run things through the process? It sounds like one of the biggest ones has been this decentralization. Is there anything else that you would call out, or has that really been the biggest thing you guys have adapted based on experience so far?
So for us, that's been one. I would say another one, and I've had conversations with other people from other systems about this that I think are coming to similar realizations of, you have this idea of there was a time when there was way less demand for AI and there was way less volume. And so you have this idea of like everything should go through, this kind of review, everything we should be measuring the value of the thing. We should we should have, an equity assessment for every single tool. We should have ongoing monitoring for every single tool. And we're recognizing that like there are resource limitations that make that impractical. And so like figuring out, like starting doing more to kind of figure out like, I mean, we already had like these sort of risk levels, but I think we're being like probably even a little bit more critical about like, was that really high risk, or like maybe that's kind of in an intermediate category. I think that's something that we're trying to navigate, is like figuring out how we can have appropriate monitoring in place with the resources that we have. Ben, what do you?
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
Very similar on Mount Sinai to what you just described. It's decentralizing some of this and bringing a lot of people into the fold. One of the things that I kind of had mentioned is embedding AI within existing, frameworks that work at Mount Sinai, like the digital framework. So that was kind of one of the big changes we learned pretty quickly. The other one is, I like to call it like lower the barrier of entry. We wanted AI governance to feel open and encouraging. Everyone's going to conferences, AI is being discussed everywhere. It's very accessible. So we wanted everyone to feel, you don't have to go to one place. There's not one person or one team deciding what's being done with AI across the health system. So our philosophy is, if you have an idea, bring it through this process. We'll move it quickly through so you can keep iterating on that idea. And that's really led to more engagement across the health system and I think a stronger sense of shared responsibility for using AI responsibly. So our team centrally, we work with CHAI, the Coalition of Health AI, and Gartner and some of these other frameworks. And we try to distribute that information across the health system so folks can understand, here's a playbook for how to if I'm a researcher and I have an idea with AI and I want to deploy it in a clinical setting, here's a playbook for that. If I saw a third-party solution, at a conference and I want to, do a proof of concept and kind of test it out on the Mount Sinai data set, here's a playbook for that. So that's kind of how, those are some of the changes we noticed that have made a big impact.
Cool. Ben, just one quick follow-up there. By opening it up so much, I would think you'd be driving a lot of volume to you guys. So how, if that's true, how have you guys managed just the sheer number of things coming, ideas, or vendors or suggestions that are coming to your group?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. One thing we do is we call it pre-triage. We try and bring the right folks early on, the experts, to really, we have I think Morgan kind of mentioned an intake form. We have a pretty comprehensive intake form that asks the right questions, like what business problem are you trying to solve? What would your success metrics be? Some of these kind of core questions. And then we quickly triage it, to the right place. Because one team can't just go through hundreds of these, requests each week. So I think that's kind of key is our triage process, and then bringing, we call them point people, but really champions in different areas, bring them in early so we can really get to the bottom of what are you trying to do, and we can move things quickly through.
Got it. Cool. Helpful. All right, so I want to come to you. 'Cause I know you see a lot of things from the other side. You work with a lot of AI vendors to help them navigate and prepare for governance processes. So I'm just curious, what's your perspective in general on where AI governance maturity is at across the industry based on what you're seeing in terms of the questions they're being asked and the processes they're being asked to go through?
Yeah, it's been really interesting because a year ago we would have been having a very different conversation. A lot of these programs have grown so much, and it's really to the credit of people like Ben and Morgan who've been able to iterate very rapidly and develop these new policies, procedures in a very multidisciplinary field in a very short amount of time. So the questions on the intake forms have definitely changed over the last year or so. They're not focusing quite as much on training data, for example, as more and more vendors tend to incorporate either agentic platforms or have a kind of ChatGPT brain, and then use different tools as kind of a engineering piece that's different. But I think there's been previously some of the vendors were filling out these forms, and now the submitter within the health system is one filling them out often with some significant vendor support. That's a big change. So the vendors aren't necessarily in the room anymore, whereas they might have been towards the beginning of this process, explaining their tool, explaining what the underlying technology is in some of the settings. And then having the risk triage pieces, I think, is a big change. So institutions are feeling more comfortable triaging tools appropriately, and so they're not looking at every single tool. And then I think institutions are often feeling like they're at a stage where they can look at existing tools. For a while there, we were only looking at new tools coming into the system, and I think now I see a lot more evaluation of existing tools that are already there and that are having to go through the process, like Morgan mentioned. Now that those policies are in place, they're saying, okay, we need to have a big net. And I think an unexpected consequence of this for a lot of AI governance programs is that they're not just catching vendors, they're also catching the in-house programs that the physicians and others have developed over the years that use some AI component that are also having to go through this process. So it's not, it's vendors, but it's new vendors, it's old vendors, it's vendors doing new and different things, and it's in-house. So it's a really broad spectrum of people bringing these to the governance committees that have to be evaluated. And then I think the questions that I see more that I didn't used to see are things like, how are you going to train the staff to use this appropriately, and when and where and how to use it? And then how are you going to help us communicate this to our staff? So we don't want to be responsible for describing every one of these changes or appropriate uses to our staff. We need help with that. So I think those are realizing that these are really big pieces to make AI work effectively is the staff communication and training.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you're kind of getting to the next question I wanted to ask, which is there anything that you typically are advising, the vendors that you work with, or that they should be doing to prepare to move through these processes better or more efficiently?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest difference I see, and it really is now a competitive advantage, I think, for the vendors who start thinking about AI governance issues from the outset and by design have a governance process and a governance system that they use, that they don't have to go back at the end and say, how do we do these things? How are we testing for these? These are not actually sufficient for clinical use. Even if it's not really technically a clinical product, if it's even though it's not SAMD, a lot of these products are being used in a clinical setting, and so making sure that they have the right kind of testing from the outset really saves a lot of headache down the road, both from a sales and implementation piece, but also from a development of the product piece. You know, a lot of times the engineering tests that someone might want to do are not equivalent to the clinical kinds of outcomes that the hospital and health team wants and needs to see to feel comfortable implementing. And then I think the other piece is that really the teams that integrate their product and especially engineering to sales communication are the most successful. So that sounds surprising, but often the engineers are testing for all kinds of stuff, which is great. And that, you know, healthcare vendors really want to do a good job. They are really trying. And the salespeople may or may not have the technical expertise and that to understand exactly what's happening. And the engineers may just see it as regular QA that they would do for any tool, that they don't see that it really has any impact on how you would on sales and marketing. But I think it actually being able to describe what you're doing and that it's safe and that you're proving that and that you're really working on that actively is a point of differentiation for a lot of vendors. And so if you're able to get that multidisciplinary communication going early on, you're really setting yourself up for success.
Makes sense. Morgan, just going to the flip side of this, is there anything you wish you were seeing from the vendors that are coming to you that you're not today?
You know, we have like a vendor questionnaire that we've developed. Mike Trigalis largely developed that, and you know, it has a lot of questions on there about like how are you going to help us? How are you going to support a pilot? How are you like actually training is one of the things on there. Like, are you going to help us train our employees, or how are you going to do that? But there's also some stuff on there about like monitoring, like is there like do you have a dashboard that will show us like you know, business impact, if we have like risk metrics around it, then it'll show us that. If there's a way that we can monitor for equity or inequity through your platform, either through a dashboard or like an API. You know, I think something. I think there's a lot of. I think there's not as many companies that understand like the problem space as well. Like there are a lot of companies that are technically savvy. There are fewer that have like a real appreciation for how the thing is going to be deployed in practice, and then can sort of ideate with you about like, all right, well, here are some potential risks around this. I think it's good to have, if we have like a vendor that we can work with where we're sort of speaking the same language about like they get the problem that we're actually trying to solve with their tool, and can help us figure out, they can help us solve the problem of like, how will we monitor this thing over time? That's extremely useful. And I think there are some partners that like, there are definitely some partners that are operating in good faith. One area where I think even from a tech standpoint that we have trouble is, you know, with it used to be that we were working just with predictive AI, and a lot of it is like binary classifiers, and there are some. I mean, there's pretty well established metrics for binary classifiers for how well they're working. Generative AI can do a lot more, and that's a double-edged sword. It makes it a lot harder to come up with a meaningful measurement, like a you know, just it works across the board. You know, you can use this measurement to say how good this thing is. So like, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, not just by vendors, but like broadly about like, do you how can you quantify effective this thing is in this context? to the extent that vendors can help us with that, that's great. But that's actually kind of a problem that I think all of us are kind of collectively working on, is like figuring out like best practices for measuring, for monitoring these generative AI tools.
I agree. I think one thing that how I think about it is that right now we're asking questions that establish the floor, making sure that we're not harming people. Is this as safe as our current standard of care? At least as safe as that, so we're not harming more people. But we haven't really gotten to the point where we're evaluating, is this a transformative technology that's really going to improve everyone's life? How much better are we going to make our care that we're providing for our patients? And how do we know that we're continuing to do that on a longer term basis? I think those are the questions that we're going to grapple with over the next few years.
Yeah. Yeah. In the interviews we had, with the 20 or so different health systems we spoke to, I think generally speaking, folks were relatively mature across, let's say, the first half of the life cycle, from, intake to the triage to even the committee meetings and how they were discussing. But I think where almost universally folks were still figuring things out was on the local validation and ongoing monitoring side of things. And so actually a good segue, because I wanted to come to you, Ben, because I know you guys have actually spent a bunch of time on kind of the AI assurance lab, or thinking through kind of how you guys are going to approach this. So would love, if you don't mind, just giving a quick overview of where you guys are in that journey and how you're approaching it.
Yeah. So, I stepped into this role about 2 years ago. I think, the good news here, I was very lucky when I stepped into this role. Mount Sinai, about 10 years ago, the hospital leadership team realized, we need, AI, they kind of saw where AI was going. It's going to be an influential tool in healthcare delivery. So at that time, about 10 years ago, they built an internal clinical data science team that, it sounds like Morgan, very similar, really focused on risk prediction models, which we know those types of metrics and around model performance. That team's deployed models directly into clinical care. They had a pretty robust process for, prospective analysis, monitoring, post-go live observability and monitoring capabilities. So I think, Mount Sinai, I'm sure similar to other health systems out there, had a strong technical foundation. I think now, it's how do you scale what we do well at that level to now all these hundreds of third-party vendors, which more traditionally weren't measuring things. So what's new now is really scaling that expertise into a more formal, AI assurance capability. So, again, Chai has been a tremendous partner here, coming up with the model card. We're leveraging that in our process. We have that risk stratification. So the plan is really to grow this into a dedicated, unbiased, kind of sitting separately outside of our framework. So there's no bias there. You don't want the person developing the model to also assure the model, right? We want to stay away from that. So, we want this group to operate independently within our life cycle to provide that, objective oversight. And I think, the biggest problem we're going to see is how do we scale it? Some of these models coming through, Mount Sinai is an Epic client. These that are touching, clinicians are using for decision support, some of these Gen AI tools. How do we maintain that rigor that we've done with our internal team and scale that now to the hundreds of models we're seeing kind of come through our governance process? So, that's where we are. The assurance we've just kind of kicked off recently, and we've done, the team has produced a few reports, so it's very promising, where we're starting. But we have to build it out in a scalable way just because of the heavy volume coming our way.
Yeah, makes sense. And either Ben or Morgan, for you, I mean, I think what you both shared is again a common refrain that we heard, which is, we have some experience with this around predictive models, right? But really generative models and how you monitor those or assure those is where things are a bit newer and less defined. Is there anything, I know you're both still early in it, but are there any early lessons or things that you've experienced that are worth sharing at this point?
Yeah, I can jump in here first. I the perspective we have at Mount Sinai is we're not going to solve this alone. I think there's a lot of collective wisdom out in the market. You know, and you have to start somewhere. Like a lot of what we're doing now with assurance is we're playing catch up. Like we've got some products and models live that are third-party models, and they didn't go through this rigorous process our internal team had. So keeping things kind of this crawl, walk, run approach where start somewhere, get some early wins, and really start to institute processes that have a big impact. So, early on it was the intake process and getting a shared inventory and having a common understanding of what AI means and one policy. So those are early wins. But now it's like, how can we scale this? So that's kind of the key I think I've seen early on with the assurance.
Yeah, for the generative space, I think like one of the biggest realizations we had was many of the tools that we have in the space. First of all, well, at least some of the tools that we have in the space are extremely flexible. So like we have Microsoft Copilot chat available for all of our users. It's an AI assistant. It's a general purpose tool. People can do with it whatever you want, whatever they want. So in thinking about like, oh, how do we put guardrails up around this thing? It's like, well, it's not really practical to have like additional guardrails over and above like what's already built into the tool. But something that we can do and that we I think should be doing and that we're now working on doing is having is educating our users, because I think we're just not far enough along yet to expect that everybody knows about all the risks. And clearly, I mean, something we've definitely encountered like during the governance process, during intake, people sort of underappreciating some of the, like, for example, complexities of human AI interaction and how those can feed into some of these risks. I mean, people may be familiar with the concept of confirmation bias. Like you get into an argument with somebody and you go to www.provemeright.com and find the version of the a version of the answer that that's like, see, I was correct. But AI specifically these foundation models can sort of like reinforce that tendency through their sycophancy. So like sort of even if you're not really deliberately trying to get them to answer the question in the way that you want, just the way that you ask the question, they're going to tend to steer their answer towards like they're going to tend to answer in a way that agrees with you. And so having some appreciation for that, I think, is important. And there are a lot of other examples of that. I think this is something that is hopefully like an effort that you make early, but that in 5 years is not, it's just like it's just part of the zeitgeist that like everybody gets. Nobody's falling for the Nigerian prince scheme anymore. Like we all know, like, yeah, it's the no, of course, like you don't send money to the Nigerian prince. And like I think we need to get to that point, but there's like a ramping up period. And so we're trying to accelerate that through, directly educating our users. And hopefully in 5 years, it's just like something, these are just things that everybody understands. And, they know like, yeah, if it gives you sources, you can't you have to check those. Like if it's something important, you got to go and look. It'll make things up.
Makes sense. Cool. Want to hit one more question, and then let's open it up to Q&A, because I know there's a bunch that are in the chat already. So then one thing I want to touch on is we've seen a pretty rapid increase in the number of called digital AI governance tools that are aimed at helping health systems manage these processes. I think we're tracking something like 20 or already that are kind of in this space. So it's gotten very crowded very quickly. I'm just curious what your perspective is on the current state of the market, where these tools are potentially helpful, where maybe they're missing the mark. Yeah, I'd love to get your early thoughts.
Yeah, I've probably spoken to all 20 of those. I'll have to look at your list. Yeah, no, we've taken, you know, again, we have this internal data science team. They've been using Confluence, Jira, like there's like 10 tools, Plotly, all these tools for visualization, model registry, model ops, that kind of thing. You know, when we're looking at the marketplace, we're really looking for a tool that can help us manage the workflow. It's like a workflow tool in addition to the registry, in addition to the, you know, post-go live monitoring. You know, for the companies out there, I think each kind of bring, you know, a unique, you know, they have their competitive advantage. One, you know, some I've seen they have really pretty dashboards and it, you know, you could have your compliance officer, your product manager, your engineer kind of come into one common tool and manage, you know, the life cycle. But I think the real challenge isn't the UI or the interface. It's really, I think what's going to differentiate these companies is comes down to the data. And you know, it's easier with internally developed models, but you know, going to Epic and going to these big you know, all these radiology vendors or whatever it is, asking them to get that output, like take that output and put it into these systems, keeping data in sync. You know, workflows change, data changes, all of that synchronization. I think whoever can help solve that um, is going to be the leader in the space because the value prop is clear. This is an unregulated space for the most part, right? Like there's a risk mitigation. You need to have some sort of tool to manage all this risk. But I think the real value lever is the acceleration. There's a lot of process and reviews and people, you know, you have that chai life cycle that we kind of follow, and there's a lot of checkpoints along the way. So you know, the vendor who can really help with that data problem and getting that information into a centralized tool, I think they will be able to show the acceleration of the high impact. How do you take 100, you know, models coming through for you to review and find the 5 that will have that highest impact and accelerate that to deployment? I think that's going to be key.
Got it. Cool. Morgan, anything you want to add? I don't know how much you've dug into the landscape so far.
No, definitely like we have been like we're trying to take the most bare bones approach possible. So like not we're interested in solutions that that involve licenses that we already have. We've met, I think, with like maybe like 2 vendors in the space, and you know, we just without getting to the specifics, again, I don't remember all the specifics. We weren't so impressed with the solutions that it was like, yeah, this is going to solve all of our problems. I think Ben alluded to a lot of the challenges around this. And I think as you know, we're doing like we were using a Microsoft list as our inventory, and we are now moving to using Azure DevOps. And it's but I think there's like I think the longer we do this, the clearer it'll become to us like what are actual problems that we need a vendor to solve, and then like then we could probably enter into the discussions around that, like you know, with a little bit more with a clearer sense of what we're actually looking for. Um, the ones that we see, they look great. They look great, and that's what I'll say about that.
Sounds good. All right. Well, we've got a queue of questions here, so we'll try and get through as many as we can, and I'll just put these out there for Sarah, Morgan, Ben, whoever wants to dive in. We'll start with the one from Troy. I'll just read it real quick. So one of the biggest challenges we've seen in governance is the multidisciplinary nature of who needs to review the backlog of diverse AI tools and use cases. How are you managing the coordination and logistics associated with pulling the right people in at the right time without overburdening the process?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think this is Troy, I was alluding to earlier about the pre-triage. When we get in, we ask everyone across our health system to just put in an AI intake form. You know, we've tried to simplify the form as best we can. And we've got a small tiger team of folks who take a look at those, making sure we've got a clinical perspective, maybe an informatics perspective, a tech perspective. And I think, the key is through our digital governance, we've kind of oriented ourselves by journey. We have a patient journey, a care journey, and a staff journey. And we surface these at the right groups to try and get quick feedback. Obviously, conceptually, it's easier to talk through it than in practice, but we try to cut down the cycle time by having that strong triage process. I'm not sure, Morgan or Sarah, curious what you're seeing out there too.
Yeah, right now, so I like we still have like this centralized, partly decentralized, but we still have like one for anything that's not like on a platform. We still have like this one AI governance committee that things are coming through. Something that we've discussed, and I mean, honestly, Ben, as you've talked about this, and as I've been thinking about it, I'm like, God, maybe if there's a way to push this out, governance out to these like to these pre-existing governance bodies, that might be the way to go with this. But something that we've started to think about is, look, we have one governance committee that everything's coming in front of, but for example, we have two bioethicists on it. Do we necessarily need to have two? Is there a way that we could split up some of these things so that we have like maybe one AI governance committee for like things that are clinical AI, and then like maybe something like a separate one for like, well, this has to do with the insurance, or this is like some back office function. We've got a couple of clinicians on our governance committee that like, if they're evaluating like something like AI for finance, maybe they have less to say. So I think, yeah, I think like pulling people in at the right time, uh, people in at the right time is one way to do it. But yeah, it might be nice if we had things set up in such a way that it's just getting routed to a group that already has like the expertise that's necessary, and they're all just kind of hearing about it at the same time.
I'll just say briefly that I think one thing that some systems have done that I have seen that is, and I think Morgan and Ben are both working on this, is developing in-house capacity of people who understand AI and can work on these issues, so that the group of people who understand the risks is not a group of 7, and is more like a group of 70 that you can pull from more easily. And so I think those efforts are nascent but growing, and that's going to be an important piece of this puzzle also, is just helping all the people with the domain expertise also have enough AI expertise to be able to meaningfully contribute to these conversations.
I'm going to jump to the next question, which is about risk levels and how they're defined. Actually, so I want to start with you because I know you've thought a lot about this. How have you thought about, low, medium, high, what those mean, maybe which types of tools kind of fit within those different levels?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex question. It's a great question, and more complicated than it seems at the outset. I think it's easy to say non-clinical stuff is low risk and clinical stuff is always high risk, and that's probably not quite true all the time. There may be some pieces of a non-clinical workflow that may be higher risk, whether it's from a finance perspective or a clinical perspective, and then the opposite may be true as well. I think starting with things that are obviously high risk, so decision support that very clearly impacts the patient's journey and outcome. Things that are patient facing are almost always classified as high risk because of the concerns both about patient response and understanding, and then also reputation management. And then pieces that have an impact at multiple different areas of the hospital and impact communication significantly, because we know that communication is such a high risk piece of healthcare in general. I think those are generally high risk tools as well. So I think there are lots of ways to go into it, and I'm happy to talk about it all day, but I would love to actually hear Ben and Morgan and how you guys think about it as well.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on a lot of the, things we look at too, reputational risk, right? And some of those. Yeah, again, we use the CHAI risk categorization tool, which they just published recently. That's really helped us stratify. You can see some of the questions. When you ask a question, is this a clinical administrative tool? It starts putting you down a pathway, and then it's like the question Sarah mentioned, is there PHI involved? Is there human in the loop, or is it an automated workflow? Those types of questions can, I mean, what we kind of see is a lot of them will kind of fall into the same high risk category, right? So we do have to find a better way to, within high risk, how do we stratify those to like critical high, or right? So we're still working kind of through those, but yeah, very, very similar, Sarah, to what you said.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Right now, I think we've got like basically 6 questions that we can ask for. If the answer to any of them is yes, we consider it to be significant risk. But they all have to do it. It all boils down to basically like, could this cause? Is there a significant risk of harm to patients, members, employees, and learners? And so we kind of right now are just using this non-significant versus significant risk distinction. I think partly because of the resource constraints that I alluded to earlier. Like we're gradually, I think we will gradually figure out like a way to sort of identify like separate out within significant risk, like high risk, and then like, yeah, I mean, there's a risk, but it's not super high. But because there are going to be some that we want to do, there are going to be some high risk ones where we want it to be like white glove treatment. This is really like we have to pay super careful attention to this. And there are others where it's like, yes, it's significant risk, or there is a potential risk here, but uh, you can kind of check these boxes off, and like as long as have you've done this basic risk assessment, equity assessment, you have a monitoring plan, an escalation plan, um, you know will probably basically be okay. The chances that something really catastrophically bad is going to happen are extremely low. And we have an audit process in place to go back through and check occasionally to make sure that people are basically doing these things. But I think there are some where it's going to be like, yeah, we need like a lot of attention on this program to make sure that things go right.
And I think one thing to highlight, I know Morgan and probably Ben are, familiar with working on this right now, but I think there's a perception in some hospitals that if something is FDA approved as SAMD, a software as a medical device, that it then is kind of free and clear and you don't have to worry about it ever again. And when in fact the guidelines do say that you should have a monitoring program in place for those tools as well, which is quite a burden really on these hospitals and health systems. If you think about, right now when a patient has a pacemaker, they are not monitoring every single pacemaker that comes in just in case it might go awry. But for every every SAMD product that they use, they have to implement the same kind of monitoring process, which is a pretty significant piece to it as well. So it doesn't just stop at the these are usually the highest risk things are probably going to be SAMD, but they still have to have the same treatment.
Well, all right, I'm going to see if we can get through maybe a couple more questions. There's one here. It's a good one. It's also a relatively straightforward one, but I think one a lot of folks face, which is how, for Morgan and Ben, how are you guys facing or approaching the data privacy and security question, and particularly around data being used to train models, the vendors that you're working with? Just curious your stance on that.
It's a no from us. Like almost, I think that's like almost uniformly part of our like service agreements. Is just like you can't use our data to train your model. Yeah, I don't know if we have exceptions to that, but like pretty much every program that I've been involved with, that's been our position.
Yeah, that's the same here.
All right, simple enough. One topic we haven't talked about too much, but a good and important one, is educating other members of the system, clinicians, other folks, about AI, about your processes, like any best practices, from either of you on just helping to educate the broader population at your institutions, about these topics?
So I've been pretty heavily involved in that. I feel extremely behind on that front. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to figure out like the best way to get that information out. I do think that there's a big component of as more and more people are using these tools, the less centralized that education process will need to be. But we have identified that we do want to have some dedicated education around safety. So around like general AI safety and around AI stewardship for program owners. Those were we've discussed making those both mandatory for the target audiences, but the target audience for the general AI safety would be the entire organization. So you can imagine we get pushback on that. So we talked about maybe linking that to access to certain tools. So like, yeah, it's not required for everyone, but if you want to use the tool, then you've got to take this basic course. And as we're working on the curriculum for that, we're trying to keep it high level and digestible, but also with concrete examples so that because I think if you stay in the theoretical space, it's sort of hard for people to appreciate. So trying to work out some concrete examples that we can give to people for that. I've been very slowly working on some videos to help people with using AI assistance. Because that's been an ask. People really are trying to figure out like, how do I use this? And we've also had talks about we've had a couple of educational like conferences, and like some of those have included like promptathons. I think we're trying to figure out how we can do more of that kind of like in-person interactive training. But yeah, I think keeping things practical and concrete is really an important component of that, because people have understandably limited attention for like sort of the more abstract concepts.
Got it. Ben, anything you want to add on the education front?
It sounds very similar. We've got a talent, we call it TDL, Talent Development and Learning Group. Our nursing informatics, very similar. It's very decentralized right now, but this is a priority. Going into 2026 is not just the literacy, the education, but adoption. As ambient's becoming more widespread, how do we meet the clinician at the point of care and educate them, on these tools. So it's happening in a lot of different areas across the health system, but I think we do want to make sure more centrally we support all these efforts because they're so critical, into the adoption piece.
See if we can get to one more question quickly. Interesting question here on model tests. So questions: when and why do you run model tests on vendors? Do they substitute for proof of concepts at all? And have you ever failed out a vendor due to results of a model test, or is it predominantly the POCs that are going to be the driver of whether they move forward or not?
Yeah, it's a good question. POCs, in an ideal world, you're doing a quick look like assurance test, right? For anything high risk. And then you approve it for a POC where you're going to do that local validation, right? So first, yeah, check the model. Is it going to do what it's supposed to do? And then two, do the local, the testing. Yeah, I guess they kind of go hand in hand in a way. That's the ideal process, but if you're running multiple proof of concepts, for very similar types of models, before it kind of goes more widespread, you do want to come back to some sort of central governance and look at success factors. Is the model doing what intended to do? Are you meeting your success metrics? Is there ROI or some sort of benefit, right, that you're measuring, and can you produce that? So I would say it's all part of the process. You're kind of catching it maybe in multiple places, but the proof of concept is probably key because that's where you're really validating on your data and your ecosystem. Yeah.
Well, I know we're at time, and apologies we didn't get to all the questions. We had a lot of great ones. We'll do our best to get a lot of these questions answered, maybe follow up with something in one of our upcoming newsletters just to cover as many as we can. And yeah, then just a quick reminder for everyone who wasn't with us at the beginning of the webinar, we just released our AI Governance Playbook, has a synthesis of a lot of the conversations that we've had with folks like Morgan, Ben, as well as Sarah's pretty incredible toolkit that, for anyone building an AI governance program will have a lot of great assets. So we'll drop the link in the chat and you can grab it there if there's interest. And then finally, we'll send the link of this recording around. So if you missed any of the session, you'll be able to check it out there. So huge thank you to our panelists, Ben, Sarah, Morgan. Really appreciate your time and insight. And thanks everyone for joining, and have a great rest of your Friday.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thanks, Bobby. Nice to see you both.
You too.
Let's see.
You too.